So I'm just going to begin with introduction to our speaker today. So the format for our presentation today. We have Ed Randall, as a retired academic, and together with myself has been a long-standing member of what's called the Centre for Economic Justice, and we act as the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on land value tax. Ed's been closely engaged with the subject of land value tax for a number of years, and has recently developed some data or research on the use of land value tax as an economic stimulus. So without further ado, I will turn over to you, Ed, and for you to advise us on the content of your presentation today.
Right. Hello, everyone. What I'm going to do, because I've actually got a script for this, which I'm happy to share with anyone who's here. I don't think there are lots of us, through Joe at the end. And given our numbers, I see this very much as, I have seen it as a challenge to myself to explain as clearly as I can to others why it is that I'm such an enthusiast for capturing land value. So hello everyone, I'm here as someone who works with and supports the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture. Part of what I'm going to say comes from a presentation that I made to the APPG on land value capture at the beginning of the year. I'd like to begin the session with I've put in brackets here deceptively, simple thought experiment. And I hope you can see in the presentation I'm sharing what I actually mean by thought experiment. I'm inviting everyone to imagine 3 pots you put into and take out of in the course of your life. The first pot is the pot that contains your effort, your energy, your creativity. I'm calling it the personal effort pot, PEP for short. The second pot contains some things that embody your work, your PEP, and the work of others. I guess it's a kind of PEP plus plus plus. It represents the work and ingenuity that makes it possible for you and others to increase what can be produced and consumed. One label for that second pot is means of production, or for short, MOP-P. That means of production pot has also been referred to as the capital pot. And then there's a third pot. It is a deep and fascinating pot. We're still a long way from comprehending all it has to offer. In a critical sense, of course, we all came out of it. Some people call it nature. I've labeled it our common treasury, or OCT for short. I don't want to suggest that the third pot cannot be changed by what goes into it and comes out of the other 2 pots. And I should add that even though we are part of nature, we are also very good, conceptually at least, at distancing ourselves from nature. The third pot contains a lot of things that have become, from a human perspective, more valuable over time. What is in the third pot doesn't have a monetary value unless we humans attach an exchange value to it, to what we claim that comes from nature. Using the MOP-P, the means of production pot, we can, as a species, greatly amplify what can be taken and utilized from that third pot, our common treasury. Our species has, in the last 300 years, become more and more aware that what we put into and take out of the MOP-P makes a huge difference to our lives, both individually and collectively. And here's the point I want to make. I'm keenly aware, as I think most of us are, that the third pot contains things that become more valuable in monetary terms whenever there is human competition for them. When competition intensifies, the monetary values we assign can become hard to comprehend. even though we are responsible for them. A window on this was recently opened by Savills, the international estate agents. And I'm quoting here from what you should be able to see on the screen. Just 10 countries contain 70%, that's around $142 trillion of all global commercial and residential value. Total value around the world, $200 trillion. China and the US together account for 42%, $84.8 trillion of global property value. So having introduced you to three pots, what's this thought experiment that I'm inviting you to join me in? Well, it's this, and it's Swiftian. Imagine two worlds. One of them contains the haves and the other the hows. In the world of the haves, there are just two pots. It's a two-pot. You might even say it's a tin pot world. The haves, pot one, is familiar. It's PEP. It's your personal effort. The second pot is simply known by them as the cap pot. Maybe that should be kaput. The cap pot in the haves world combines, or perhaps it's better to say conflates, everything found in nature with everything the haves have made to increase output and consumption. In the haves world, it is possible to purchase legal title to just about anything aside from other haves. Although some haves, I am told, believe that the private ownership of nature may amount to slavery for haves who have nothing apart from their labor power to help them make ends meet. In the world of the hows, it is different. There is a clear distinction between the things that come out of and into each of the three pots. Hows do not accept, in fact, they have outlawed the private ownership of any part of what they call our common treasury. Everyone in the world of the hows accepts there is a price to be paid for what comes out of the common treasury. That price is recognized as a charge for use of a share of the common treasury. And hows even draw a distinction between technologies invented, developed, and deployed, which are more than 20 years old, and those that have appeared more recently. Technologies dating back more than 2 decades become part of their common treasury. All public revenues in the world of the hows come from charges, or less commonly, taxes, especially taxes levied on what is judged harmful that is put into the pot labelled our common treasury. The tax or charge code in the world of the hows is remarkably simple. Hows zero rate all earnings and profits from investments or returns on investments that help to maintain or improve the hows MOP-P, their means of production pot. And now, at long last, I think we get to the point of the thought experiment. I invite you to ask yourself the following question. In which of the imaginary worlds, all other things being equal, ceteris paribus, the world of the haves or the world of the hows, would you expect to find the most productive economy and the society with the keenest appreciation of nature? And if you are willing to tack something extra on at the end of my question, I suggest asking yourself, why have I answered in the way that I have? Before continuing specifically on taxation, I want to invite you to consider some possible commonalities between elements of a thought experiment I invited you to take part in and a critical period in the history of science. Consider for a moment the Ptolemaic, the Earth or geocentric view of the heavens, and the Copernican, heliocentric view, sun-based view of our solar system, the heavens. It may come as a shock to find out that Copernicus began by making things simpler, much simpler. His De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestrum, published in 1543, put the sun, not the earth, at the center of the heavens. Humans no longer at the center of everything. Ptolemaic science had to become increasingly complicated in order to keep humans at the center of things. Galileo, who published a pamphlet in 1610, building on Copernicus's work, met great resistance from the universal Catholic Church to his ideas. And the deal, securing the heliocentric view of the heavens, wasn't sealed until Newton, embracing Copernicus, was acclaimed over a century after De Revolutionibus. The Ptolemaic way of thinking had grown in complexity and sophistication and become a huge obstacle to progress in science. In our own time, when it comes to political economy and tax policy, we have every reason to reflect on the criticisms that Adam Smith and Henry George made of tax arrangements, taxes. Their insights are valuable to us if we want to challenge and change a tax system that is saturated with unfairness, self-defeating complexity, and now is an appallingly poor fit with the needs of our world. I wonder if there is something as critical and as fundamental and wrong-headed as the ancient world's commitment to a geocentric view of the solar system and beyond it the universe. Something that is limiting our ability to fairly and intelligently tax or raise at least the revenues that we need for good government. And of course, I believe there is. And what is more, I believe that we have the arguments to persuade and the information we need to do much, much better in refashioning fiscal policy and advancing essential economic reforms. We have good reasons to junk taxation paradigms that frame tax policy as a choice between taxing beneficial economic behaviour and raising sufficient funds to pay for what are, by common consent, essential public services. If there was a magic money tree from which all the funds needed to pay for good public services could be harvested annually, would you support an annual harvest? Your answer, I expect, would be yes, but you might add, no such tree exists. Let me change the question just a little. If there was a source of public finance capable of supplying a substantial part, perhaps a majority of what was needed to pay for public services, that could be harvested from wealth and income that had not been earned and that would, in the process of collection, enhance the performance of the economy, would you then be in favour of collecting it? I hope your answer, like mine, would be yes. Yes, let's have it, if it's there. And in common with many of those who subscribe to the aims and policy prescriptions of ALTER, I believe that there is a harvest, a fair and just harvest that could underpin our public realm. Let me explain. There's a paradigm for framing tax policy which I believe is a good fit with the goals of liberals and Democrats, and I've little doubt many others. That paradigm begins with understanding and communicating the three-pot view of our world. It is a paradigm that makes it possible to see how those in government can respect the legitimate, the just entitlements of workers and investors and the choices of consumers, and reconcile them with a straightforward commitment to pay for high quality and well-managed public services. Such a paradigm or perspective begins by making a clear distinction between the income and wealth that comes from what we can achieve as economic agents on our own and with others, and wealth and income, which is, it has to be said, very unequally distributed, which has little or nothing to do with human endeavours. We know that a great proportion of wealth and income that's now in a few hands has almost everything to do with being the people in whose hands it is being well placed to extract value from our common treasury. Value extraction that entails, at least at present, no matching contribution to our common prosperity. It is indisputable that those who are well placed in our society make wholly disproportionate claims on the common treasury, our common treasury. The roots of such unreasonable and unjustified claims are deeply embedded. They are embedded in British society, and a minority who are received, I think you will know who I have in mind, from abroad into British society. The unreasonable claims to to what is in the third pot have become a huge obstacle to all those who believe that dramatic and substantial social and economic progress is not only desirable, but achievable, entirely possible for us. However, the means to fund social and economic progress, which I believe are plentiful, remain out of reach because our common treasury has been pillaged and mismanaged and treated as though it is a private resource rather than a common inheritance. A reformed fiscal system can and should ensure that charges and taxes fall most heavily and justly on the few who are exceptionally well positioned to take what they want from our common treasury, on those who we know are especially well placed to maximize their incomes, wealth, and power at the expense of most of us while contributing little or nothing. The enclosures that swept away the commons in the 18th and 19th centuries and before have been consolidated and extended in notions of private property backed by laws which have no place in a civilized society. I want to spend most of the rest of my time talking about the viewpoint that I've introduced or outlined. But just before I go on to that, I want to make a brief observation, which I hope provides some context for what has gone before and will follow. I don't know how many of you have heard of Hyman Minsky. Some of you may have heard of something called a Minsky moment. Hyman Minsky was especially interested in economic instability. Most of his economist contemporaries were focused on economic equilibrium. Unlike them, Minsky took the view, paradoxical to many of his peers, that equilibrium or stability in markets was actually destabilizing. Stability can encourage the kind of speculative behavior that amplifies what John Maynard Keynes referred to as capitalism's animal spirits. A Minsky moment arrives when speculative borrowing, highly leveraged credit, becomes unsustainable and triggers a market crash. Consider the possibility that there is a political counterpart to Minsky's thesis about economic instability. I believe that we have entered a period in British politics and further afield leading up to the political equivalent of a Minsky moment, and Brexit is part of it. Political rhetoric about the promise of Brexit involved making claims about improved life chances, reductions in tax, and in the cost of living, such rhetoric, storytelling, reflected calculations about the scale of the electoral rewards and costs to those supporting and opposing Brexit. The claims made by the proponents have become increasingly difficult to sustain, and I think they will become more difficult still. The discrepancy between promise and delivery in the political arena challenges the political narrative of the day. What was sufficient to win an election no longer, or will, I think, no longer cut the mustard. If the gap between promise and delivery gets particularly great, appears unbridgeable, those in power, perhaps the whole of the political class, and that may worry people right across our political system, may be faced with a catastrophic loss of public confidence. To return to my theme, the case, indeed, necessity of radical tax reform. We've had really excellent advice about how to reshape our taxes. There were exceptionally well-informed and thoughtful contributions in 2010 and 2011, contributions made and led by one of the most brilliant economists ever to have lived, James Mirrlees. James died in August 2019. James Mirrlees and those who joined him in preparing dimensions of tax design and tax by design were well-informed and articulate, but insufficiently persuasive. Insufficiently persuasive advocates of a great tax shift. Shifting the balance in how we raise public revenues, shifting away from taxes on earned incomes and on consumption, onto rents and asset appreciation unconnected with effort, was their key to developing a more intelligent fiscal system. The Mirrlees case for a great shift, tax shift, is at bottom really simple. A bit like replacing a geocentric view of the solar system with a heliocentric one. If you shift taxes from things that some people at least can avoid, like work, and move them onto things where the tax liability cannot be reduced or dodged, such as the ownership of valuable and immovable assets, you will not only have more certainty about public revenues, but increased confidence that tax will not deter or diminish productive activity. The economic impact of such a shift or rebalancing in fiscal policy is obvious, especially to anyone who studied the performance of the economies of Hong Kong and Singapore. Most of us have little difficulty in distinguishing between earned and unearned income and wealth. If our tax system were to be managed more intelligently, the taxman shouldn't have any great difficulty either. The following is from the press release, the IFS press release that prefaced the Merley's review, release of the Merley's review. In the deepest and most far-reaching analysis of the UK tax system in more than 30 years, Merley's puts the case for radical tax reform. The review shows how the current system is inefficient, overly complex, and frequently unfair. And it sets out a range of proposals designed to increase output and welfare. Unfortunately for Britain, the recommendations of Merley's have been ignored by Britain's tax policy makers. In a presentation I made to the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture at the beginning of the year, I drew their attention to 3 publications that brought aspects of Merley's analysis bang up to date. I included a reference to a report by the McKinsey Global Institute, the MGI, that was published in November 2021. The MGI, which I think it's fair to describe as a friend of capitalism, certainly no enemy of capitalism, struggled in The Rise and Rise of the Global Balance Sheet to make sense of a disturbing phenomenon. That phenomenon explains the subtitle to their report. A question: how productively are we using our wealth? MGI had discovered what they called a paradox, a huge growth in global balance sheets that was unaccompanied by a matching growth in productivity, in real output. I've rephrased the MGI question. Why are we using our wealth so unproductively, I've asked, so badly? The McKinsey report finds that wealth measured using conventional yardsticks appears to have become detached from production and, by extension, from economic and social improvements for the majority of those who live and work in the world's most developed economies. Economic growth has been tepid in recent decades, even though balance sheets have risen enormously. The MGI team refer to a striking growth in the valuation of real estate and most especially the asset value of land, specifically the valuation of what in many cases were already highly valued locations. Think back, in terms of my presentation, to the Savills commentary on international land values. In a key section of their report, the MGI team inform readers that at the level of the global economy, the historical link between the growth of wealth or net worth and the value of economic flows, measured by such things as GDP, no longer holds. The McKinseys wrestled with why we were failing to use our wealth more productively. However, they don't seriously consider a critical role in responding to the productivity paradox, to use their terminology, for governments or for tax policy makers. And they appear to be uncomfortable with the obvious linkage between credit creation and the rise and rise of balance sheets, between bank lending and unproductive, dare I say, unsustainable increases in wealth. As the need for something that realigns wealth and productivity grows ever more pressing, it is surely essential to do more than report on and lament the fact that the ownership and valuation of assets, and land in particular, have become detached from productivity. The MGI report on the world's balance sheet was preceded by the publication of a truly remarkable discussion paper. The paper was written by a quartet of economists. I've taken to referring to them as KTH&G: Michael Kumhoff, Nicholas Tideman, Michael Hudson, and Charles Goodhart. They set out to model and explore a tax shift in the US, but it's not just the US this applies to. The shift they were advocating meant taxing income and capital of the kind I described earlier on, that goes into a genuinely developed means of production, taxing income and capital more lightly and land ownership more heavily. Their tax shift was consistent with maintaining public expenditure and providing, this is what they called it, a post-corona pandemic stimulus to the US economy. Their paper was titled Post-Corona Balanced Budget Super Stimulus, the case for shifting taxes onto land. It was published by the ThinkNet Centre for Economic Policy Research, which is based in London. The full KTH&G paper isn't an easy read. It is quite technical in parts, but it is a brilliant presentation of the case for, to quote them, finding the fiscal means to stimulate the US economy while continuing to finance current levels of public expenditure and debt. KTH&G aren't alone in observing that the share of land in total non-financial, and this is very important, non-produced assets has been growing rapidly in recent decades. Land now accounts for more than 50% of total non-produced, non-financial assets in the US. Official estimates suggest that the proportion of wealth held in land is even greater in the UK. In their representative household model of the US economy, the quartet, who are by no means, I think this is quite important, ideological kindred spirits, found that increasing taxes on land from 0.5% to 5.5% in the US was consistent with an increase of 3.4% in household welfare, as they defined it, and a rise of almost 15% in output per annum, against trend in the US. The reduction in taxes on labour and capital is, to put it plainly and as straightforwardly as I can, their super stimulus. What I find remarkable is that modelling of the kind that KTH&G have done has no obvious counterpart in the work undertaken by the UK government's Treasury or the Office of Budget Responsibility. The OBR makes it clear, if you go to their website, that they simply don't get involved in considering the government's choice of taxes when evaluating the government's plans, budget plans. It's extraordinary. Well, at least I believe it is extraordinary. So, seizing on what helps to underline the urgency of challenging and changing failed policies and the urgency of making a critical course correction to the UK's fiscal policies, I want to offer a brief commentary on the Resolution Foundation's final labour market report from 2021. The RAF's fourth quarter report on wages and cost of living labels 2022 the year of the squeeze. Torsten Bell, the director, and his RF colleagues wrote the quarterly report, they said, with an eye on the upheaval that can be expected in the coming decade as the effects of Brexit, COVID-19 and net zero transition work their way through the economy. Household disposable income is about to come under quite exceptional pressure because of a tax and cost of living increase, and it is what I describe as that's the British economy and society as an economy and society facing a multi-pincer movement. The RF report poses some pretty fundamental questions for the UK government. To paraphrase, why, when you are in a hole, don't you stop digging? And if I may be permitted to expand on the RF's puzzlement about government policy, why not roll back the proposed increase in national insurance? A follow-up question might be the real wide-ranging question, isn't it time for a truly radical change of course on fiscal policy, on tax policy in the UK? Earlier in 2021, the Resolution Foundation published an analysis showing that households would, on average, be paying £3,000 more each year in taxes by 24-25. The RS director declared the UK's post-pandemic outlook, as set out in the most recent budget, was not the high wage economy envisaged by the PM, but rather a high tax, big state economy in which growth in pay packets and family incomes looked anemic. And since he made that observation, of course, we know that Russia has invaded Ukraine with unquantified but undoubtedly substantial implications for the severity of the squeeze on living standards in the UK and elsewhere. So let me take a drink. I want to conclude this presentation by responding to the following question I posed to myself. What are the takeaways and key points from all this? Number one is the critical importance of promoting a grand strategy, one that encompasses certainly a great tax shift, but also calls for a change of economic philosophy and outlook, one which recognises that we live in a three-pot world rather than a two-pot or tin-pot world. Secondly, the importance of stressing that it's tax structures, not tax rates, that really matter now. I don't mean tax rates are unimportant, but we've got to get something fundamentally right, which we haven't got right in the past. The third point is this. It's the strength of the case for putting out what I describe as a call for tax aerodynamicists. Now, in Formula One motor racing, there are people, the most important people in the F1 teams, who design cars that can go through the air. Most of the other elements, brilliant as they are more or less equivalent between the teams. It's the aerodynamicists who literally cut it in F1. If we want a tax system that's fit for purpose, we need tax aerodynamicists that make the most of something called GIS or GIS, that is geographical information systems, and hedonic regression. They are people who will be specialists in IT and statistics and geographic information systems. And we need to put them to the best possible use to design a tax system that is fit for purpose. They are the key to identifying what is OCT, and maybe OCD as well, and what is not, what is part of our common treasury and what is not, and reflecting that in the way that we raise public revenues. Fourthly, the importance of building a broad front with others. There are, I believe, so many common interests that need to be made explicit, and they are common. I actually think that a lot of people across the party political spectrum could actually unite if only they understood the nature of our three-pot rather than two-pot world. Fifthly, we need to identify, patrol, and expose the vested interests that hang on to the two-pot world, making all that we can of the most powerful disinfectant in a liberal democracy of vested interests that can't really justify themselves exposure to daylight, to public attention. Sixthly, the importance of asking questions. Yes, they need to be good questions, and yet more questions, because we need to make the best use possible of our comparative advantage as radicals and liberals with a large and a small L. The resources that we have are plenty: informed and well-directed curiosity, and our finely honed, informed skepticism about current policy. And then seventh and last in the list I'm going to present at the moment, but there are others, we should do all we can to help make and strengthen the case for a proportional property tax. This is a party that's lucky to have Andrew Dixon on board and his Fairer Share team. That would be a very good start to what we need to do in terms of remaking, reframing public policy, tax policy in particular. It is always difficult to take everything in a session like this, and I've gone quickly, I know that, because I wanted to get it more or less in 35, 40 minutes. I'm happy to share this script, and I'm willing to provide a copy to Joe that he can share with Alter members and attendees at this session, if that would be helpful. So that's the end of my session. As far as the presentation is concerned, I'm more than happy to respond to anything that anyone who's along here at the moment wishes to say. Okay, Joe?
Thank you very much indeed for that, Ed. That was a very thoughtful and all-encompassing presentation. I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions. I'm just going to ask Jock now, to our moderator,
Yes,
just to come on and describe how describe how best to present questions so that we can deal with those. I think the chat is probably going to be one of our main ways that we put questions to Ed today. And I'm going to start that just with a question that I have. I think there's already one on there from a member. So if you just want to advise us, Jock, if you could, on the Q&A session.
how do I just make sure, how do I open up the chat section here on the screen?
So you should have a column down the right-hand side of your...
Yes. At the moment, it says direct messages, and I don't want to click on that because the last time I did, I ended up being kind of moved elsewhere.
I think you want to click on the X next to direct messages, because that's only going to be people directly talking to you. So then you'll get event and fringe and training. Event,
fringe and training. Click on that.
Click on that, and you should see the one you're in. So
yeah,
there should be chat and Q&A.
Yep.
And I think it's probably easier just to separate general chit chat from Q&A if you put your direct questions in the Q&A.
Right.
And I'll be watching that.
Okay, so Eleanor Rylance has asked, do you see a place for LVT in ensuring appropriate infrastructure is delivered alongside housing development? Absolutely. I mean, unless we put those tax aerodynamicists to work, unless we take an intelligent approach to what should be a commonwealth and what should largely be individual resources and group resources, we really aren't going to be able to deal with the huge problems that Britain has in meeting housing need. It's very depressing. There are a lot of people who've known for a very long time that the source of many of our difficulties in producing the kind of infrastructure and housing resources we need lies in having a tax system that is wholly and totally out of whack and encourages avoidance and evasion. Ian Rex Hawkes asks, how can we get involved in this from a research perspective? Well, there's the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture. There's Alter itself. I'm sure that Joe is absolutely brimmed with ideas and contacts and suggestions. And there's the Coalition for Economic Justice, which was my introduction to a number of aspects of this whole issue. Joe asks, how do these proposals fit with the issue of identifying and taxing hidden property assets held by Russian oligarchs through shell companies? Well, I know that Joe is a specialist on tax, works on both sides, if you like, the good side, the bad side, the dark side, the bright side, when it comes to the whole of our taxation system. But the extraordinary, really important key thing about land value taxation, and this is land in a very broad sense. It's not simply the ground on which we stand or may walk. Land covers all those things that are part of the common treasury and the inventions that have become part of the resources that we all use. If we focus our means of raising public revenues on things that are out there for everyone to see, especially the most valuable immovable elements in private wealth, we will actually deal with a lot of the dodging and evasion that has made advisors of Russian oligarchs so wealthy and enabled those oligarchs to hang on to so much of their ill-gotten gains. Martin Smith asks, in terms of implementation of this shift of a proposed windfall tax on the super profits being earned by oil and gas companies show more to mitigate the cost of living crisis. How do these proposals fit? I mean, the idea of finding and putting the aerodynamicists to work, of actually making them an important part of the OBR, and indeed the open, published, public part of the work of the Treasury and the opposition in our public system. That's the way in which these proposals can actually fit in to the making and critical evaluation of public policy. Brian asked, I think the only percentage figures mentioned about increasing tax on land value in the presentation sounded relatively modest. Well, I don't think that $200 trillion worth of property assets sounds modest, but maybe I'm wrong about that. If you look at ONS data on the proportion of non-financial, non-produced assets in the UK, I think it's clear that we have, if we want to, if we go about it intelligently, we have the capacity with the tax aerodynamicists to actually zero on unearned wealth and income. And over a period, it can't happen all at once, over a period, actually shift or rebalance our tax system so that it serves our needs as a nation, as many communities, more efficiently and effectively than our current tax system does. If you take KTHG's ideas seriously, then it opens up the possibility of a series of steps which can be evaluated as we go along, which reduce the taxation that is a disincentive to effort and economic engagement, and replace them with taxes that are very difficult, if not impossible, to dodge and avoid, that actually require of the wealthiest in our society, who I believe benefit from huge ill-gotten gains, require them to make a much more substantial contribution than they do at present. Martin Smith, sorry, repeating this question as you misread it the first time. In terms of implementation of this shift in tax emphasis, do you see a gradual shift? I think that was what I was just saying. That is, initial minor reductions in income tax and increases in LVT becoming larger over time. Absolutely. I'm a retired academic. I benefit from what even now, despite the criticisms that currently employed academics make of it, what's a remarkable pension scheme, the university superannuation scheme. But I'm not naive enough to believe that the USS is paying me the kind of pension I'm getting without actually relying very heavily on rents of one kind or another. I guess, to be honest, I'd be very unhappy if there was one giant stride which replaced our current tax arrangements with ones that scoop the pool so far as rental incomes are concerned. I think it's necessary for the process to be gradual and extended. But if it is gradual and extended, I think it can work. Jock, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, sorry. Just in terms of the gradual implementation, I just wanted to refer back to the fairer shares thing, because
yes,
for a long time I kind of regarded, although I like Andrew Dixon and know what he's trying to do, because it works on the whole property value, not just on land value, I kind of dismissed it for the longest time. And I was having a discussion a few weeks ago, and it suddenly dawned on me that actually the whole thing about proportionality, if you begin to learn that if you live in a low value area, you'll pay a low tax, and if you live in Westminster or Hammersmith, you'll pay a high tax, instead of this current system where, you know, Wandsworth pays 200 quid a year and Leeds, you know, the poorest part of Leeds pays £2,000 a year. Once you get into that mindset of knowing that it's proportional to the value of where you live, then we can start talking about shifting the balance in favor of land and away from capital. And that's what, for example, a lot of the Pennsylvanian cities have done, where they have a split rate tax where they can, over time, raise the tax that falls on the land value and lower the tax that falls on the building value, and maintain revenue neutrality. Once you get to that point, you can then say, well, let's incorporate other taxes into this. So that might be a way. You know, for a long time, I've been a kind of iconoclastic revolutionary in terms of land value tax. You know, I just want it done now. But that actually, you know, and it gains some political traction because there are, you know, Tory MPs who recognize there is a problem with low value areas paying high taxes.
I think the most sensible people who are involved with the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture, who want to broaden support, the most important thing for many of them now is what you could call political education. Without showing how these notions that I've described in my presentation can work in progress, can work in part, without introducing them in a way that gains popular support, wins public understanding, it's very hard to get to the destination I think we need to get to. For Liberals, Democrats, there's a huge challenge in terms of public political education. And the point is that reforming our tax policies is fundamental not only to an intelligent shift in taxation, but a reorientation of our economy, that grand strategy, our economic philosophy. So there is an extraordinarily close fit between the ecological ambitions and the economic and social justice ambitions of Liberals and Democrats. I believe that very strongly, but I don't think that it can be done in one bound. And though we now have the resources that enable us, for example, to distinguish very straightforwardly and clearly between the value of the land and the value of what stands on it, we don't really have the institutional apparatus developed to anything like the extent we need it to be developed to move very rapidly and substantially and smoothly to a different tax framework. We can do it, and I think it can be done with very considerable public support, even amongst those who are losers, with something like Andrew Dixon's proportional property tax as a very important first step. One of the things that's impressed me about Andrew is how careful he's been about trying to maintain broad support and involve people from across the political spectrum. I really do think we need to do that without compromising intellectually on our justification, our presentation of why it is so necessary to move in what I call the right direction. Ian, Rex Hawkes, it has been mentioned in the chat, but is there a solution to the necessity of valuing land regularly rather than as one-off for inheritance or gifting? There most certainly is. Anyone who believes that outfits like Savills can't actually differentiate the different components of value and do so continuously doesn't actually understand how sophisticated modern means of valuation have become. If something needs to be valued for a purpose which the valuers are clearly motivated to do, they now have the means in terms of IT and intelligent use of geographical information systems, hedonic regression in particular, to actually do the job. Have we got a policy on reforming the land registry as a government agency? Yep, I agree it's a prerequisite. I was once, I'm not now, I was once a member of the Liberal Democrats. I'm not sure exactly what detailed current policy of Liberal Democrats is, but the land registry really should be a resource for the whole of the community, and part of the process that we would go through in keeping land values up to date and developing a proportional property tax would involve using the information at the land registry well and keeping it well and truly up to date. But in the area of residential property, there are just so many transactions. We really don't have a difficulty in producing accurate, reliable, up-to-date values if we want to, if we have the political gumption that is required to actually give the land registry its important part of the job in doing that. I think there are more problems in valuing other kinds of sites when you think of the land, the site value component of land value taxation, but I think they can be overcome. Martin Smith, one clear advantage of an LVT is to make it more onerous to simply sit on properties, which relates to a session I attended yesterday. Do you think we would see more homes being made available for people to live in? Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. There was a point, this is a personal confession, when I had sufficient money to acquire a second property, a holiday property. I didn't actually do that. I have assisted my daughter so that she, unlike many in her age group, does have a mortgage and a home that she's in the process of purchasing with the aid of a mortgage. But I've no doubt, although I'm very comfortable here where I'm talking to you from, I think we use our residential resources very poorly, and I think that that's a very direct consequence of the economic, the tax and other disincentives we have to actually using residential property more in a more socially just and efficient way than we do at the moment. So absolutely, LVT, one of the benefits it would undoubtedly have outside of the pure machinery in our economy of physical production is to actually share land-dependent resources, accommodation, much more fairly and intelligently than we do at the moment. Neil McIntosh comments, why doesn't the government just declare land as a national asset and charge everyone rent? I don't think members of the Conservative Party will be particularly attracted by that in the way that I think they can be, and some of them have been attracted by Andrew Dixon's proposal. I think the key thing is to actually have a sensible, realistic, justifiable way of collecting that element of the sharing of our common treasury that we should all share in. Ultimately, it's the rents and the accuracy of those rents, rather than whether what's being rented is declared a government-owned asset or not, that's important. So I guess that I've always wanted to avoid getting into arguments with people where they're hung up on who ultimately owns all of this. I want to focus on making sure that the value to the community as a whole of our common assets is actually reflected in the way that we charge for using resources, that we should recognise our common resources. Have I exhausted everyone's patience? Are we at the end of the time allowed?
No, we've still got a little bit of time left here, Ed. So, yeah, thank you for responding to those questions in detail. I just wanted to take a few minutes while we could, just to discuss the work of Alter. If we're able to get Tony Vickers on, Jock, I'd like to bring Tony on just to discuss some of the resources that are available. For those, some of you will be familiar with Alter as an affiliated organisation of the Liberal Democrats. We're the campaigning arm, if you like, within the Liberal Democrats for land value taxation. We maintain a website and where we have a number of pamphlets, short pamphlets written in plain English that are used essentially for campaigning at local party level and at various functions such as regional conferences which we attend from time to time. As part of our work, Alter is also, of course, a member of the Coalition for Economic Justice, which I mentioned in the introduction, acts as the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture. That is a cross-party group chaired by John MacDonald, the Labour MP, and which a number of parliamentarians from the House of Commons and the House of Lords participate. So that's quite an important element of our work, because that allows us not only to essentially campaign within the Liberal Democrats, but also to assist in trying to develop cross-party consensus on these issues. As far as Alter is concerned, or as far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, we do have a policy adopted at conference called the Commercial Landowners Levy, which essentially seeks to reform the way that business rates is administered in the UK, and proposes essentially replacing the current system of business rates with what's called a Commercial Landowners Levy. And as the name suggests, that relates to commercial property and focuses, essentially puts the tax burden on the owner of the property, the landlord, as opposed to the commercial tenant, and focuses on the value of the land as opposed to any structures that a leasehold tenant may erect on that property. So that's one policy that has been adopted at conference. We are lobbying along with together with Andrew Dixon, who Ed has mentioned, in the Fairer Share campaign, for the introduction of a proportional property tax on residential property. And that, as the name suggests, essentially is to ensure equity and fairness between the taxes that are levied and the actual value of the property on which they are being levied. As Jock Coates mentioned, that is not a strictly land value tax. That's the basis of assessment there is the property value, and that's primarily comes from practical reasons, or political reasons, if you like. A similar conclusion was reached by the Scottish Land Reform Group when they looked at introducing proportional property tax in Scotland. They determined, essentially for practical purposes, that for both political purposes, that it was simpler to focus on value of property rather than become bogged down in the issue of separating property value and land value. So those are just a few comments that I wanted to make on the work of Alter. There is a lot of information on our website. I just want to bring in Tony Vickers, if I can now, just to give us some further information on the pamphlets and campaigning material that is available. So if I could turn over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, welcome everybody, and it's good to see a few of you would be prepared to be on a mailing list. It can come across as a very complicated subject, which is difficult to campaign on. And as I've put in the chat, it is party policy. What Alter's been trying to do is to help the party devise a doorstep-friendly way of explaining it, and then a gentle way of introducing it. And do please visit our website and look for what we call conference flyers, some of which have been updated. In particularly, look at the ones that relate to housing and planning policy. And we would welcome more people from academia or from the tax or property professions in particular to help us with the practicalities and to reach out to people in those industries. I mean, Joe is what you might call a traditional tax man, helping businesses to deal with the HMLR. But, you know, he understands it, and a lot of accountants do understand it. The tax system is just getting far too complicated apart from anything else. And my research has shown that actually this reform can be enormously helpful to productive industry, simpler for government, and improve the way particularly the property industry works, which is where I come from. I'm a property professional, also retired though. So we got no particular Alter research programs. We like working cross-party through the Coalition for Economic Justice, because frankly, we're not going to get this change unless we do work cross-party. And there are people in all parties, all the way from UKIP on the far right to neo-communists on the left, who from their various perspectives in terms of the values that they support can see the value in this policy. So it's a really powerful tool, but we need campaigners, probably more than anything else, to get the message across in the normal short attention span sound bites. So thanks. Hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you for that, Tony. Yeah, just following on from that, I just wanted to just describe in a little bit how Alter tries to essentially campaign within the party. So we have, as you know, the party has a number of regions. Here, I'm based in London, so I'm part of the London region. And within the regions, essentially, we have, in addition to a regional conference, of course, we have a number of local parties. So what we try to do is we have a regional representative in each area and as a focal point, and essentially the campaigning material that which we call conference flyers that Tony references are part of our material that we make available to local parties. And then we have regional reps who are available to attend local party meetings, make a presentation on land value tax and how that campaign can be furthered. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to just go to the Lib Dem, the Lib Dem ALTER website, or you can contact me directly if you need a contact for a regional rep. And if you're interested essentially in pursuing the campaign for a tax shift to land value tax in your local region, we're more than happy to support efforts there directly through Alter and through regional representatives. Okay, I'll just open up then for any final discussion at this point. I think there was a couple of questions here, Ed. I'm not sure that we covered. One initially was from Ian, I think Ian Rex Hawkins, which is on essentially was an issue of, where did I find it just now? On a flat tax, I think it was. Just looking for Ian's question. Yeah. No, Ian Rex Hawks. So this question
about
I've generally thought for a while that harmonizing income tax, capital gains tax, and inheritance tax as a single flat rate would A, level the playing field, and B, allow payment of a universal basic income to effectively allow progressiveness even with a single flat rate of tax. Is that something you'd like to comment on?
I think the need to rebalance our tax system and to persuade people that we can make a start on that, which will be beneficial to almost everyone, should predominate in how we go about trying to win public support and making the case for a tax system that is focused on raising revenues from resources that really should be seen as common resources. So I personally, I'm not an enthusiast for a flat tax.
Okay, I'm just going to come in on that, a couple of points on that, because at our last conference meeting in autumn, we did have a presentation from the UBI Center, which is a body based in California, essentially addressing universal basic income and land value tax. So the UBI Center essentially has expanded itself to a UK division. So we have people here who are in the UK that are working with the UBI Centre. And what they've been able to do is come up with a system, if you like, of marrying statistical data on income distribution, and essentially UBI putting these two things together. And they've also, the last presentation that we had essentially was on land value tax as the basis for a universal basic income. So that's something that we've presented to the all-party parliamentary group on land value capture, and that we've also presented via ALTER. We have some information on that on our website as well. So anyone interested in that particular aspect, again, I refer you to the ALTER website, and I'm happy to respond to any requests for the material that was presented on there. We have about 5 minutes left, Ed, so I just wanted to spend that. You mentioned in the presentation about follow-up material for those that wanted to get.
Joe, you seem to have disappeared. I mean, what I can say about...
Sorry, I just follow-up material in the presentation that for those that wanted to get data. I think you mentioned that you were going to make that available. There are some links in the chat that Jock and Tony have presented, but perhaps you can just...
I'm really happy to do, because I think from an event in the past, I know that Tony had a problem with images that he'd used on web pages. I've actually got the text material from the slides I put up, and as I said, I'm happy to share the script. I prefer to do that through you, Joe, so that it's available to members of ALTER and anyone else that you're happy to pass it along to. I mean, will that be okay?
That's perfectly all right. No, yeah. That'll be very good, Ed. I much appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to we've got about 5 minutes. I'm just going to wrap up then. First of all, I'd just like to thank Ed for the effort that he's put into making this presentation. Today's presentation we were a little concerned about because it's quite technical in nature, or can be seen as quite technical in nature. If you're not an economist, some of this can seem a little dense, but I think Ed's done an excellent job in presenting this in an understandable way. One of the things, I guess, just wrapping up on the message that's coming from this is most of us in Lib Dems are familiar with the idea of Keynesian economics, a stimulus which essentially is generated by a multiplier effect by additional government spending. The basis of your presentation, or at least the four economists that you presented today, suggest that the alternative to that essentially is a move away from a focus on multipliers by increased government spending, and we should be focusing our attention on the effect of how we raise taxes, or where we raise taxes from, and essentially the effects that have on the productivity within the economy. Perhaps is that something you could just again?
I don't think I bow to many people in my admiration for John Maynard Keynes' contribution to economic thought and argument, but I do think that there is it's what I regard as an extraordinary deficiency in Keynes' work. There are a couple of places where he made it clear that he really didn't take a land value tax at all seriously. That he thought that developments in the banking system and his general theory had moved liberals beyond the point where they needed to think about a land value tax. And I think he was wrong. Profoundly wrong. It's the greatest weakness in his economic thought, his general argument. One of the most disturbing things about the connection that now exists between the valuation of land, of particularly valuable sites, and the operation of our banking system, the creation of credit, is that the owners of valuable sites in the banking system have essentially got to a position where they spend their time scratching each other's backs. Further down the food chain, where people's private residences these days are bought with the assistance of absolutely huge mortgages. Certainly people in our age group, I think, if we went back to our childhood and our imaginations, could not have imagined the size of the loans that are needed to actually purchase an ordinary residence. We need to understand why it is that there is such a deep, abiding and extending pathology in the way in which credit is created and used in the purchase of homes, the purchase of land, the valuation of sites, and reshaping our tax system so that it disincentivizes that unholy alliance, the back scratching that's going on between the banking system and land valuations and purchase of property, is a critical step that we need to take. I really don't think that Keynes, if he came alive and back into our modern world, I don't think that he'd be very happy with the way in which the banking system has evolved. I think he'd be quite shocked, and maybe he would be willing, were he to be able to revisit us, he would be willing to rethink about the relationship that he assumed there was between the banking system, between the creation of credit and the valuation and purchase of property, because it is a deep, abiding and very frustrating pathology in our current economic system. Rentiers have moved in a way that I don't think he would have anticipated to the heart of our economics, and to virtually everyone's detriment. And in the end, it will be the detriment of the children of the rentiers as well. Keynes wrote a marvelous essay about the world for our grandchildren, and much of what he imagined would be in that world in terms of technology it's actually been delivered, and there's more just around the corner. But the way in which that new technology, the wonders of science and technology will be shared, we don't have that. And we don't have that because we've actually made the rentiers the kingpins, rather than a government that's equipped to collect the value that we as a society place on our common inheritance, and to respect and care for that common inheritance. Because if we acknowledge, we understand its true value, we can work out its true value, that true value will be reflected in the way that we look after it, we care for it. That the combination that I think is possible and desired by most liberals and Democrats, the combination of policies that respect our ecology, our shared ecology, and our need for an economy that benefits all of us, that's been displaced from public policy by the elevation of rentiers and rentierism. We have a particularly obscene version of it in Britain, with the people who've stolen so much from the ordinary people in Russia and actually taken it abroad to a country that seemed almost purpose made for them to hang on to their ill-gotten gains and actually enjoy them outside of their own society. We really do have to understand how to value our common heritage, how to care for it, and how to use the benefit that we get from it for what are or should be genuinely common purposes.
Well, thank you very much for those closing comments, Ed. That's very thoughtful. Okay, I think we've reached our time limit today for this fringe. Just thank you to everyone who's attended today. Please do visit our website. Thanks to Jock for moderating the session today, and to Tony for giving us the campaigning information that we need as an affiliated organisation of the Lib Dems. Thanks to everyone. For those that are Alter members, we will be having a meeting at 2:30 on Zoom. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ed. Much appreciated. Take care.
Thanks, Ed. Cheers.